All right, we're ready to go?
Are we ready to go? Yep, we are ready.
Excellent. All right. We are recording the interview of John Fuller. This interview is being conducted by David Morse from the Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded in the New Media Incubator at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. It is 2:43 p.m. on the 29th of September, 2017. All right, John. Let's start off with when and where you were born.
I was born on March 2nd, 1948 in Lincoln, Illinois.
Okay. And who are your parents?
Ken and Marge Fuller.
What were their occupations?
They started a business, an agribusiness. They raised hybrid seed corn and later on added retailing of fertilizer to farmers in central Illinois.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
Yes. Yeah, three.
Three siblings.
Older brother and sister and a younger sister.
Okay. Any of them join the military?
No.
No. Okay. So before you joined the military, what were you doing?
I was in college at the University of Illinois getting my degree in engineering.
In engineering.
Mm-hmm.
How was college life at that time?
It was fine. Enjoyed it. I was glad to get through it. It was at a time when there was a lot of upheaval in the late 60s with the Vietnam War going on. I would study in my dorm and I'd hear them protesting out in the streets. So
Yeah.
that wasn't all the time, but
Wasn't all the time.
yeah.
Okay. And what college did you go to?
University of Illinois. It was aerospace engineering department.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And so your next step from college was then what?
Well, we had a draft going on at the time, so and also this was just after the Apollo moon landing missions were over with, and the Vietnam War was winding down. So the need for aerospace engineers was dwindling. It was a very lean market. So I only had one interview coming out of college, which was with an insurance company that would have me go. I think the job was to go around and inspect buildings. I did not take that job. But I also had a draft, the lottery number of number 29, which put me pretty high to cause me to make choices. I had taken, on the side of my engineering curriculum, I had taken flight courses for the 4 years I was in college, and resulted in me having quite a few civilian flight ratings coming out of school. So one of our fertilizer salesmen, it's a long story, one of our fertilizer salesmen in our family business, he was in the Air National Guard in Springfield, Illinois, in the personnel department, and he got me an interview with the Air National Guard, and with my engineering and flight experience, I was accepted to be a pilot in the Springfield Air National Guard.
Wow.
So as soon as I graduated from college, I went off to training.
Now, backing up a little bit, what interested you into flying?
It's funny. It connects back to the family business. One of the things my folks sold to farmers was chemicals for insecticides and fertilizers, and there was we're in a small town. We had a retired Navy pilot from World War II in town that had a dry cleaning business, and he also had a Stearman biplane that he crop dusted with, and my folks wanted to sell chemicals, and he wanted to get paid for flying, so they got together, and I would tag along. I was probably 5 to 7 years old, and I would tag along with my dad as he carried a flag at the end of the field. As Jimmy was the pilot's name, he would make his passes over the field. My dad would walk so many paces to give him a target for the next pass. So we'd stand, I'd be next to my dad watching this airplane fly over our heads and spraying malathion all over us, and and watching him land out on country roads and fields, and watching them start the airplane up was pretty exciting. It was also about the time a movie came out with Jimmy Stewart about Charles Lindbergh's biography. It's called The Spirit of St. Louis. I saw that movie, I read the book. Our neighbor had an airplane, so my brother flew model airplanes. So I was kind of fascinated with it, and that's kind of why I went into aerospace engineering. But that led to me getting my flight certificates.
Yeah. It's very cool. Now, so you get out of college. What year did you end up getting out of college and then enlisting?
It was January of '71, and the Air National Guard, at that time, the way it worked was they had to wait for the Air Force, regular Air Force, to tell them when they had a slot open for pilot training. So I had to go in for my guard weekends each month, but I hadn't been trained to do anything yet. So they stuck me back office, arranging files and file folders and file cabinets, and until finally got the word that I would be going to pilot training. They sent me to Lackland Air Force Base through enlisted basic training. Have you been to Lackland?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, I
all right.
have been to Lackland.
Yeah, so I went through enlisted 6 weeks there, then came back and worked waiting for the pilot slot, which finally came in November of '71. But I worked in the family business waiting for this to happen, and then went into my drill weekends with the Guard.
Okay, so I'm interested. How was it just before you went to basic training? So you're in this lull period
Mm-hmm.
where you're sitting there just kind of doing your weekend duties, office paperwork. What were your feelings about that? Was it what you expected when you enlisted into the Guard?
Yeah, pretty much. They said they didn't know how long it was going to take, so I was employed at the time, so I was okay financially, but there was a lot of anticipation, wondering where I was going to be sent to training and what it was going to be like, because I'd not flown any jets or anything like that yet. But I felt fortunate to have gotten into that arrangement.
That's good. And Lackland Air Force Base, what were your thoughts about that?
It just, I think something the college prepares you for is you learn to take steps towards an eventual goal, and this was just one more thing that I was going to have to go through to get to the flying part. And I do remember going through the obstacle course at Lackland as part of the training. I think we were laying on our back and crawling under some ropes or something. I remember seeing a T-38 way up, several thousand feet of flying over, and I said, well, that's what I'm doing this for. I have to go through this to do that. So
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Kind of motivating.
yeah.
That's pretty
Kept
cool.
me focused.
Yeah. Okay, so you get done with that. You get your assignments as far as pilot training.
Mhm.
Where was your pilot training at?
Columbus, Mississippi, Columbus Air Force Base.
Okay.
It's in east central Mississippi. So, I mean, the paper comes and it says that's where you're going, and where is that? So you scramble for the nearest map because I've never heard of it before. But
All right. And so you get there around what time?
November of '71.
November of '71.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a 1 year. At that time, it was a 1 year school.
And explain to me what pilot training was like.
It was broken down into 3 segments. They started with a Cessna 172 for you had guys coming in with no experience at all. I had about 400 hours of flying. so the initial part was a single engine civilian airplane type of operation, and then we had T-37s, the Cessna twin jet, which is not used anymore, and then the T-38 was the longest part of the course at the end. We had a mixture of, I guess the thing I was most impressed by, I was just impressed by the other people in my class. I thought it was a nice group to be identified with. They're professional and congenial people, and it was interesting. Some of us had no time, some of us had some experience, but I think the guy that finished #1 in the class, he had no time, no flying time when he started. But we had a mixture of reserve and Air Guard, and probably 2/3 of the class was regular Air Force, and so we were all we all tried to do well, because your class ranking determines at the end of class, a list of airplanes comes out that's going to be available to that class, and so whoever finishes #1 gets their choice of any of those airplanes. Now the Guard guys, they already knew what airplane they were going to fly, because that's what their Guard unit had. So my Guard unit had F-4s, and we were the first Guard unit in the country to get F-4s. It was still a frontline fighter for the Air Force at the time. Usually you think of the Air Guard, and they've got older models. Our Guard unit had F-84, much older airplanes, just as I went in, but I never had to fly those. Anyway, I'll stop there. I've lost track of your question, but
You're fine. So you're going through training, and you said your training was about a year long, right? Was your training 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day?
It was typically ground school class training, learning systems and procedures and checklists. You'd either do a morning class or an afternoon class, and the other half of the day would be flight. And they had about 6 weeks for the T-41 propeller airplane, and 18 weeks for the T-37, and the balance of the year was the T-38.
And you moved on to the T-38s.
Right.
Okay. And during this whole time, your training, were you able to have some free time, some weekend passes, or anything that to kind of get your mind off the training?
Yeah, we were free to come and go from the base. There were activities on the base a little bit, theater and a couple of restaurants, I think. Columbus, Mississippi is not a very large town, and a lot of us were not from that area, and we were wondering what it was like to live down south, but we had to be kind of careful, so we didn't, we behaved off base and not end up in the the jail at night, in the county jail that might be from the Civil War era. And so, I mean, they'd tell you that to make sure that you did behave. So.
Sure. That's cool. So, any instructors that you could think about offhand, whether it be ones in class or flight instructors that were standing out, that are standing out to you?
I think the one I remember the most is my T-38 instructor. His name was Nick Ardillo. He had flown the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam, and he was my instructor. So he, knowing that I was going to be flying F-4s, we had a good relationship. And he, I just found out several years later, he became base commander of Columbus Air Force Base. But in fact, at our 5 years ago, at our last reunion, he was still there, working with industrial development in the community, and just ran into him, and I was surprised he was still there, because that's 40 years later.
So just to kind of ask you this, because I know I've heard of it before, but it's been from other people, and I want to actually ask a pilot, is there a status that, or a prestige that comes along with, you mentioned, pilots get the ranking from school, they get to pick their own plane. Is there kind of a prestige that comes along with what you fly?
Yeah, well, I'll put this, I'll just say the facts. Typically, the top guys in the class take fighters, and then everybody else takes what's left. Our number one guy, who was very sharp, it was kind of funny, I think he was regular Air Force, and the planes came down, they had some transports, he took a KC-135 tanker, and all the instructors were mad at him because there were 2 or 3 F-4s available to the class, and they said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I thought it'd be better for my airline career," and they didn't want to hear that. But, that sticks out in our mind a little bit.
That's funny.
Yeah.
All right, so where was your first assignment from there?
Coming out of undergraduate pilot training, then I had to go to F-4 school, which is out at Victorville, California, George Air Force Base, and which is no longer active. It's turned into a commercial transport airport. It's up in the high desert east of Edwards Air Force Base, and we live in a little town there named Apple Valley, but that's where I went, and that was about 9 months of school for that, and then from there, well, I got married right after undergraduate pilot training, so my wife and we moved to California, and from Miami, drove a Corvette with a young St. Bernard puppy in the back of it from Miami to Los Angeles, which was an adventure, and then lived in Apple Valley, California, and when that school was over with, we moved back to Illinois where my guard unit is. So that was my first military assignment, which I knew day one going in, that was where I was going to go.
Sure.
But my biggest concern was, well, that's not a full-time job. That's, you're a part-timer in the Guard, and so we had to look for employment for both of us.
Mm. Now, transitioning from T-38s to F-4s, did you find it very difficult, or did you find that they were pretty compatible?
Yeah, I went from things being easy at the start of all the pilot training, easy, that I found it very challenging later on, and formation flying was challenging to me, and challenging meaning I had a hard time getting through it, and the instrument, flying on instruments, but I was a slow learner, but I think I got pretty good at it. It's just you have to achieve proficiency in a reasonable amount of time, so I just barely did that and got through the program. But the additional things you do in the F-4s, of course, ordnance delivery, air-to-ground, air-to-air fighting, combat maneuvering, and mid-air refueling, things like that. They're all things that in my previous flying experience are just totally foreign to what I'd done before, but they're all challenging, and there's a lot of satisfaction in being able to do them.
So you completed all of your training at this point. You come back to your Guard unit. And what time frame or what time period is this?
Yeah, I'm done with F-4 school. Report back to my Guard unit about September of '73, and at that point, it's just you have a obligation for your summer, a couple weeks in the summer, where they deploy the whole unit somewhere to see if we're mobile, mobilization, see if we can move and operate, and then during the rest of the year, it's just getting in about 10 hours of flying a month, which means you go in on the weekend drills, and then you still have to go any days you can the rest of the month just to get your 10 hours. There are a lot of squares to fill. Instrument flying, refueling, night flying, air-to-ground, bombing, strafing, things like that, which we would fly over to different air-to-ground ranges to do those things. But my obligation was for 5 years from completion of undergraduate pilot training. And I ended up working in our family business again, and also managing a small airport in Lincoln, Illinois. And as my time approached, I'm kind of getting ahead of you a little bit, but as my time approached for my commitment to be up, I decided not to stay in with the Guard. Too many jobs.
I'm sure that was hard balancing all that. So you're there now at your Guard units. Were these the same people that you were doing the paperwork for previous?
Yeah, I was one striper when I was doing that office work, and then when I came back, I was somewhere in the process. Early on, I took some correspondence courses, and they waved the wand over me, and I became a second lieutenant. You had to do that before you went to pilot training, and then everybody makes captain, so I was captain when I got out of the Guard.
Did this create a different dynamic, or was everybody still kind of the same?
Well, you just worked with different. Over in the office, it's the office staff, but when you're pilot, it's a different building, whole other staff that you're working with, the life support people and the squadron managers and maintenance, airplane maintenance people.
That's good, yeah. So, did you, so this is around, you said 73, right?
Yeah, 73, got back to my Guard unit and had about 4 years of obligation left.
4 years,
Yeah.
okay. During this time, did you happen to get deployed at all?
No, it was very rare. There were a few units that were activated in the Vietnam era. I think we had the peace talks settled in 73. We did our final pullouts of the U.S. forces in 75. So this is right about the time I'm in the Guard. So it's all withdrawals at that point. And the only trips we made were typically summer camps. We went out to Luke Air Force Base for a week or two. I think we went back to George. Typical camp was up at Volk Field up in Wisconsin. We went to Biloxi once or twice, and right after I got out of the unit, they went to Italy, so I missed that trip. But no, we were not deployed, other than for training.
Sure, sure. The amount of training that you were doing, the different types of training that you were doing, you said a lot of it was ordnance dropping.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do air-to-air, all that kind of stuff? Can you describe a little bit into detail, a little more on the different types of training you were doing?
Yeah, the heart of the mission was the ground support. We would do low-level trips. We had gunnery ranges in Indiana and up in Wisconsin, and we would typically just fly up at high altitude to those places in probably a 4-ship usually. We'd go around and around the pattern, doing 30-degree dive bomb. We carried this little spotting bombs, the small bombs that put out a puff of smoke when they hit, and then guys on the ground would score you. And we'd make about 4 passes dropping bombs, and then the last 2 passes were gun. We had the Gatling gun in the F4, and it shoots 100 rounds per second, and they loaded 100 rounds in the airplane. So you got 2 passes, and the first pass was a sighter burst to see where it was shooting, and then you come around the second time and hose off the other 3/4 of a second of ammunition, and they would score that. So to maintain proficiency. We would go out and chase each other around, simulating dogfighting, practicing maneuvers, trying to get in position for other airplanes. We'd have to meet up with tankers, just to practice, to keep our rendezvousing skills sharp and being able to maintain position on a tanker, take your fuel loads off. We had to do low-level routes, which, having been a light airplane pilot also, I was always nervous on those because we were at 500 feet, typically 480 knots, which is down where a lot of light airplanes in Illinois and Missouri are. And so we kind of try and keep our eyes wide open because they come awful fast when you're trying to miss them. Had to do instrument approaches, so much night flying a month, and landing currency was usually not a problem. It was a two-man crew, and keeping proficient at coordinating with your other crew member, both of you fitting in with procedures. Just all the time we spent in the airplane, it was all considered just maintaining proficiency at all those things.
That's good. It's really good.
Very few cross countries.
Now, you said it is a two-man aircraft. The difference between, so I'm trying to imagine this, you have a forward and an aft
Right.
Seating arrangement.
Right.
What's the difference between the two?
In the year that I came into the F4, the nickname for the crew member in the back, one of the nicknames was Gib, G-I-B, the guy in the back, or more formally they're known as a WISO, Weapons Systems Officer, WSO. And the F4 had, at the time, it had a pretty high state-of-the-art radar for locking on to other airplanes, and he was in charge of running all those. I was trying to get in position. He's telling me where the target is. He's locking on, telling me, helping me get in position, and telling me what ordnance we're going to be arming up. And the switchology of, we had several different weapon systems, and you had to get the switches all in the right positions for whatever you're going to do next. But the backseater, they were typically navigators. They came out of nav school, but had applied for and wanted to be a weapons systems officer in an F4. And so they were typically non-pilots, though they would sneak some stick time in. Okay, when we're flying formation, we would let them fly a little bit. But I was always nervous about that. But they had their, it was a different duty back there. They were typically not pilots.
That's cool. All right, so moving on from there, you decide that you're not going to extend your contract with the Air National Guard at this point, because you're juggling too many jobs at this point.
Right.
Right. So what do you do at that point? Were you happy and content with the job that you currently had, or was the plan to move on from that point?
Yeah, in my civilian job, I had transitioned. My first civilian job coming back from F4 school was flight instructing and helping run a fixed base operation at our local little airport. And as I was in my hometown where I grew up, my folks are there running their family business. I've always paid attention to it. I used to work for them all the time I was a kid, and I became more interested in that business, and they needed help. And so I transitioned into helping manage the family seed business and fertilizer business. So that's, and that became, and it was a growing business at the time. We had about 45 employees, and it looked like where I wanted to spend most of my time and help try and build the business. Sure,
that's very cool. what kind of things were you experiencing? Going back into the military real quick. What kind of I guess things were you experiencing either while you're in training or while you're on duty that you saw were oh, I'm sorry, let me rephrase this question. You're in training with other people at the same time, other airmen, whatever, that were not going to pilot school earlier.
Right.
Did you see the same kind of treatments, or I mean, I guess not treatment, but did they seem to? I don't know. Let me try to figure out how to word this question, because I know when I was in basic training, you know, we would always talk about like, where are you going? What are you doing? What's your AFSC? When they talk to you, you're in basic training, and you said, I'm a pilot, or I'm going to be a pilot. What was the majority reaction on that?
Well, I think they wish they could do that, but and they were all kind of scratching their heads why I was in enlisted basic training. I found out later when I got to pilot training, all the guys there says, "Oh, you're Fuller." He says, "We're up at wherever the officers go to basic training in Tennessee," and they said, "There was a guy named Fuller that was supposed to be there that was never around. We used to march around in a missing man formation for you because we didn't know who you were, but you were supposed to be up there." I said, "No, I was down at Lackland." And so they, well, I'm sorry, what was your question again?
I mean, you were kind of
Oh,
answering
the guys at basic training that they enlisted, yeah, they were puzzled by why it wasn't. I was puzzled too. I didn't know why I was there, but we got along. I did KP with everybody else, and that was about the worst job. You've been through that, I'll bet.
Yes.
A severe diaper rash from standing in that steamy kitchen doing the pots and pans.
Yes. That's funny. All right. So kind of wrapping things up a little bit here. Now, what are you doing now? What's your life like?
Well, I was mentioning our family business was growing, but there were some economic hardships. Late 70s, we had a recession. We had high interest rates and some government programs that paid farmers not to do anything, which all of that combined to put us out of business. So I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I know how to fly. And it turned out the airlines were just starting to hire at that time. This is around 1984, 85. And I got on with a commuter airline up in the Midwest, which eventually ended up being absorbed into Continental Airlines. So I ended up in Continental Airlines, based in Denver for a good part of it until they closed the Denver base. And then we stayed living in Denver, but I commuted to Newark, New Jersey for 11 years. I was in the right seat all the time. Because of being in family business, my age got, by the time I joined the airline, my seniority kept me pretty much where the best schedules for me were to stay in the right seat as a first officer. So I could have upgraded to captain and had lousy schedules, but with the commuting and everything, I stayed in the right seat. I flew the 727, 737, the 777, 75, 76, and we ended up retiring from that in 2005. So, but then we had another crash in the stock market. We thought we had enough money to retire on. We still have a comfortable retirement, but it was not going to be. We had to go back to work. So I found a place that was needing pilots, flying air taxi, 135 turboprops, and I'm still doing that right now. I'll be 70 years old in March, and I just got type rated 2 years ago in a Cessna Citation. I've transitioned into corporate flying, where we've got about 4 different airplanes owned by different companies that just need crews, need pilots. And we fly typically mostly around Florida, but I've had some trips as far away from, we're based in Naples, Florida area. I've had some trips as far as Seattle. We go up to Asheville, North Carolina a lot, and Ohio, down to Middletown, if you know where that is. And one of our owners is a retired doctor that has a jet, and but they don't let him fly it alone, so he has to have somebody with him, which is me. And that's what I'm doing today.
Wow.
Maybe another year or two, I don't know.
Yeah. What about veteran organizations?
I've not joined any. I haven't had the need. We have health insurance from my wife's former employer, which was the federal government, and now we're on Medicare, which is fine. But as far as veterans organizations, no. I've been meaning to look at USAA car insurance, especially since my car just got flattened with a hurricane. But
Yeah. But you're here in Ohio for a specific reunion.
yes, yeah.
What is that?
It's the Columbus Air Force Base Pilot Class 7303, which means it's our 45th anniversary of our graduation. Today is the date, and we started out with about 40 people in class, and we got about 13 of them to come to this reunion. So we usually do it at Columbus Air Force Base, which is still one of the few undergraduate pilot training bases still open. When we went through, there were 11 or 12 bases because of Vietnam mostly, and now there's only 3 or 4. But we're here for that reunion. Our first reunion was the 25th, and we've done it about every 5 years since then. So, and we need to find a new chairman for that for the 50th, because I don't want to do it again. Just in case any of them are listening to this.
Just in case. Your official retirement from that.
Yeah, I'm going to
position.
tell them tonight too.
Do you find that any of them that you come in contact with today anymore, are they still flying? They still have that passion?
Most of them are not. One of them's flying for NetJet. He's a retired Delta captain. He's flying for NetJets. And who else? Most of the others are not flying. We had 3 generals out of our class, a 2-star, a 1-star. Well, Tim's the 1-star. He'll have that in his interview. He's such a nice guy. He may not mention that. He's just kind of. I love it when I see nice people rise in the ranks like that. But anyway, we have a good time at our reunions.
That's good.
He and I. The weird part of the story mentioning Tim, we'll put this in the archive. He's from Duluth, Minnesota. I'm from Illinois. He dated a girl in high school in Duluth, Minnesota. And I had a blind date arranged for me, and I drove from Illinois up to Minnesota and met this girl up there. And then it's the girl he was dating. He and I didn't know each other. He and I met in pilot training class. And where are you from? Oh, Minnesota. Oh, what part? No, Duluth. And I said, oh, do you know a girl named Marion up there? He says, yeah, I dated her in high school. So we're all good friends right now. But he's a good guy, and we get a lot of kidding about that.
Wow, small world.
Yeah.
All right, so reflecting back kind of on your overall story, think about your military experience specifically.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel it's kind of molded you or prepared you for who you are now, what you've done later on in life?
It was a big plus in my career. I've always been, I feel, a patriotic person. Again, as most people know, Vietnam was a controversial era. We were aware of the, as I mentioned on campus, students protesting and others didn't care. We thought we had a job to do, but I've always glad that I was able to serve my country and do it in a way that would also help my career, which I think it does most people's careers. The military is a good thing to have on your resume, and it's a rare thing to have. There aren't many F-4 pilots around, and that was a good thing to put on my resume for later jobs, and among other things. So helped me get my airline job.
Yeah, sure. For future generations that would be listening to this,
Mm-hmm.
is there a message or anything from your story specifically that you'd want them to hear?
Just to always look for opportunity and be prepared. Try make choices, and ideally you'd like to enjoy the job you take. Try and find a career that you enjoy doing, and you'll never feel like you're working hard. And I'd say serving your country is an important part, and with the military, I think there's some discipline and structure that's given to your life, and that helps you in all modes of life.
Absolutely. Well, do you feel that we've covered everything? Is there anything that you would like to share that maybe we haven't covered so far?
I'd just like to compliment you. Everybody here that I've met seems to be on an even keel and helps reinforce my hope for the future of the country a little bit, because there's so much else that I see that would tend to make me feel the other way. But I'm glad to see there's somebody that's level-headed around. Not too many body piercings, or one tattoo maybe.
Yeah,
That's
got a
fine.
couple.
Yeah, my son does too.
That's good. All right, well, John, it has been my pleasure. Thank you for
All right.
your service.
Yeah, I hope it helps.
Thank
Yeah.
you for
You're
your
welcome.
story. This
Same
concludes
to
our
you.
interview.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Are we still recording?
We'll go ahead and take your microphones off, and then,
All right.
Brad, go ahead and mute their mics, but we'll just.
Oh, in case I did anything embarrassing.